Krishna 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 Hare Krishna 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Surabhyay Namaha Om Surabhyay Namaha Om Surabhyay Namaha Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim Yat kripat maham bande Shri Gurum Dinataram Yat kripat maham bande Shri Gurum Dinataram Hare Krishna. Hare. Welcome everyone to our daily Bhagavatam. We are now reading from Canto number 6, first chapter, which is entitled The History of the Life of Ajamil, the ongoing conversation between two great personalities, Srila Shukadeva Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. So we have text number 6 on the board. Adhuneha Maha Bhaga Yathaiva Narakan Naraha Nanugrah Yatanan Neyat Tan Me Vyakyatum Arhasi Adhuneha Mahabhaga Yathaiva Narakan Naraha Nanugrah Yatanan Neyat Tanme Vyakyatum Arhasi Adhuneha Mahabhaga Yathaiva Narakan Naraha Nanugrah Yatanan Neyat Tanme Vyakyatum Arhasi Adhuneha Mahabhaga Yathaiva Narakan Naraha Nanugrah Yatanan Neyat Tanme Vyakyatum Arhasi
Adhuneha Mahabhaga
Yathaiva Narakan Naraha Nanugrah Yatanan Neyat Tanme Vyakyatum Arhasi
Adhuneha Mahabhaga Yathaiva
Narakan Naraha
Nanugrah
Yatanan Neyat Tanme Vyakyatum Arhasi
Adhuneha Mahabhaga Yathaiva Narakan Naraha Nanugrah Yatanan Neyat Tanme Vyakyatum Arhasi
Adhuna right now,
right now,
iha,
iha,
in this material world,
in this material world,
Mahabhaga,
Mahabhaga,
O greatly opulent
O greatly opulent,
and fortunate Shukadeva Goswami,
and fortunate Shukadeva Goswami,
yatha,
yatha,
so that,
so that,
eva,
eva,
indeed,
indeed,
narakam,
narakam,
all the hellish conditions
all the hellish conditions
into which the impious
into which the impious
are put,
are put,
naraha,
naraha,
human beings,
human beings,
nana,
nana,
varieties,
varieties,
varieties of,
varieties of,
ugra,
ugra,
terrible,
terrible,
yatanan,
yatanam,
conditions of suffering,
conditions of suffering,
na yat,
na
may not undergo,
may not undergo,
tat,
that,
that,
that
may,
may,
to me,
to me,
yakyatum arhasi,
yakyatam arhasi,
please describe.
please describe.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. O greatly fortunate and opulent Shukadeva Goswami, now kindly tell me how human beings may be saved from having to enter hellish conditions in which they suffer terrible pains. Kindly repeat after me. O greatly fortunate
O greatly fortunate,
and opulent Shukadeva Goswami,
opulent Shukadeva Goswami,
now kindly tell me
now kindly tell me
how human beings
how human beings
may be saved
may be saved
from having to enter
from having to enter
hellish conditions
hellish conditions
in which they suffer
in which they suffer
terrible pains.
terrible pains.
Purport. In the 26th chapter of the 5th canto, Shukadeva Goswami has explained that people who commit sinful acts are forced to enter hellish planets and suffer. Now Maharaj Parikshit, being a devotee, is concerned with how this can be stopped. A Vaishnava is paradukka dukki. In other words, he has no personal troubles, but he is very unhappy to see in trouble. Prahlad Maharaj said, "My Lord, I have no personal problems, for I have learned how to glorify your transcendental qualities and thus enter a trance of ecstasy. I do have a problem, however, for I am simply thinking of these rascals and fools who are busy with mahasukha, temporary happiness, without knowledge of devotional service unto you." This is the problem faced by a Vaishnava, because intelligent men must take advantage of these instructions. Unfortunately, however, the entire world is lacking Krishna consciousness, and therefore people are suffering from the grossest ignorance and do not even believe in a life after this one. To convince them of their next life is very difficult, because they have become almost mad in their pursuit of material enjoyment. Nevertheless, our duty The duty of all sane men is to save them. Maharaj Parikshit is the representative of one who can save them. Translation again. O greatly fortunate and opulent Shukadeva Goswami, now kindly tell how human beings may be saved from having to enter hellish conditions in which they suffer terrible pains. So by nature, all living entities who come to the material world, they come under the very stringent laws of material nature. They also come under the influence of the three modes of material nature. We are constantly under these very stringent laws. One is in reference to the threefold miseries of life: Adhyatmik, Adhibautik, Adhidaivik. Constantly, as long as we are encaged in the material world, we are subjected to the influence of the threefold miseries. And as long as we are in the material body and have not taken the process of self-realization which leads towards mukti or liberation and beyond, actually, we're also heavily influenced by the three modes of material nature. The lower we are on the scale of the gunas, the modes of material nature, means the more we are under the influence of ignorance, we suffer. Suffering is due to ignorance. Therefore, Vedic knowledge, its primary objective is to give people opportunity to know, is to give knowledge. Prabhupada is making this point. The primary goal and meditation of a Vaishnava is because one knows, one who is a Vaishnava is one who follows Shastra, who has received knowledge, who is cultivating knowledge, and who understands that actually unless people get knowledge, they will simply continue their sinful activities in the material world. So the more we are deviating from what is meant to be what we call the laws of nature, natural laws of nature, then we are engaged in sinful activities, and the more we engage in sinful activities, the more we generate karma, karmic reaction, for which we are having to suffer. Although the reference is being made here to the 5th canto, the 26th chapter of the 5th canto is a vivid description of the hellish planets. It's not just poetry, they're there. They exist. But these hellish conditions as described in the Bhagavatam, are also created even on this planet. Just like one time when Prabhupada was in England, and he was asked about what is hell, and he had mentioned England is hell. No sun, always cloudy. And then Prabhupada also tells the story of one priest who is trying to preach to his congregation, many of whom were miners working in the mine. So he was trying to explain how if we engage in sinful activities, we'll go to hell. Hell is a very dark place, very little air to breathe. It's wet. He's explaining like this the conditions of hell, and then there wasn't very much reaction. They were not convinced. So then he thought for a moment, actually hell, in addition to being all these things, is a place where there's no newspaper. Oh, they said no newspaper, then we don't want to go to hell, no. So, human form of life is actually to cultivate proper knowledge so that we can put an end to our otherwise unending suffering in the material world. Of course, the descriptions of the hellish planets and other conditions that we find everywhere in the material world because of the presence of these threefold miseries, that is very much on the bodily platform. What is more a cause of suffering, what is the real, we could say, root of our suffering, anywhere in the material world, is having been disconnected with Krishna, isn't it? It's just like losing a friend. One of our foremost of acharyas, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he nicely explains that actually this is the greatest sinful activity of the living entity, to have rejected Krishna. Krishna is described as Suridam Sarvabhutanam, Bhuktaram Jagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheswaram, Suridam Sarvabhutanam Gyattvamam Shantim Rishyati. He is the well-wisher of all living entities. He is the best friend of all living entities. Yet somehow we find ourselves in the material world having rejected that friendship or that relationship with the Lord. And therefore we are like someone who, in India they say anath, right? Orphan, no father. No father. One who is like an orphan, one who has no father. No, that means that he is not protected, and he will find himself in all kinds of miserable conditions. So this is what is nicely being explained here. This is the question being raised by Parikshit Maharaj, who is expressing his concern for the suffering of the living entities in the material world. And Prabhupada explains how this is actually meant to be the foremost quality of a Vaishnava. When we cultivate this knowledge of Krishna consciousness, we come to understand, we should come to understand, that whatever may be happening in our own personal lives, or in other words, whatever suffering may be coming our way, we have the proper knowledge and understanding in the Shastra to accept it, because we come to know about karma. In previous lives, we are here in this life because we still have some karma to live out. So in other words, we have created our own situation of suffering. So in other words, a devotee is less concerned, less in anxiety, or not at all in anxiety regarding his own personal situation. A devotee is meant to be what is called Atmaram. Atmaram, he is self-satisfied, fully satisfied. And he is the least concerned about so many ups and downs of the material world. He knows that, okay, today's cloudy, after some time the clouds will go away, the sun will come. But the sun may be there, we know after some time the clouds will come. That is the nature of the material world. Happiness and distress, that is one of the very first instructions given by Lord Krishna to Arjuna, isn't it? We have to learn to tolerate. Matra sparshasta konteya shitosna dukha dukkada agama paino nityas tam titikshasva bharata. Titiksha. Bhagavatam describes titikshava karunika suridam sarva dehinam. Titiksha. We cannot do anything about all of the terrible things that are happening in the material world. They're happening. Of course, the most important thing, there is something we can do in terms of, on two levels. On a personal level, we have to tolerate all of these various disturbances and inconveniences that come, number one. And the other, on the other side, we, because of this knowledge that we receive from Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we know that this suffering is due to sinful activities. So therefore, a devotee is anxious to introduce and explain the principles of dharma, because by following dharma, by knowing about dharma, we will not be engaging in sinful activities, isn't it? That is also explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Knowing and understanding, that was also mentioned in some previous class. Understanding the difference between pravriti marga and nivriti marga. Pravriti marga generally means engaging in all kinds of sense gratification. Falsely thinking, understanding that because I have this body is meant for enjoyment. We fail to understand that actually before receiving this material body, yes, in all the other species of life, the senses were there for enjoyment. That is law of nature. The animal propensities are there in all the different forms of life. Propensity for sense gratification. It is also there within the human body. But the major difference is that in the material body we have developed consciousness. We have the opportunity to actually develop our consciousness. We have the opportunity to learn that we can by the help of the higher faculty, by the help of our mind, we can control our senses. But sometimes our mind is uncontrolled. So by the help of the intelligence, we can control the mind. This is all explained. We could say the ABCs of Bhagavad Gita. But whether it is the material senses or the material mind or the material intelligence, all of these three being material, if we remain on that platform, we're in trouble. We have to rise above these three levels of material senses, material mind, and material intelligence. So that is one of the important instructions that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. He mentions that actually the more we are conscious of our transcendental nature, our real nature is transcendental, it's not this body. This is just temporary. What is permanent, what is our real self is the spirit soul. So the more we are remembering, the more we are conscious, the more we are endeavoring to remain conscious of who we are and what is our primary business. Knowing ourselves to be transcendental to the material senses, knowing ourselves to be transcendental to the material mind, and knowing ourselves to be transcendental to the material intelligence. Krishna explains, with a steady mind, we should utilize what Prabhupada terms as deliberate spiritual intelligence. We have material intelligence, but we have spiritual intelligence. That's why we hear from our acharyas this expression, Shastra Chakshu. Whatever happens in the material world, we should learn to see it through the eyes of Shastra, to understand it through the eyes of Shastra. That everything happens for a purpose. Nothing is accidental. Our suffering is caused by a purpose. We are actually the cause of that suffering, either in this life or in previous lives. And as we mentioned earlier, and as Krishna explains, it is simply due to ignorance of our real identity and our real position. So therefore, a devotee, one who is in knowledge, number one, for himself, he will not be in undue anxiety, regardless of what happens, even to the point of leaving this body, because we know that this is something that has to happen. All of us, every living entity, embodied living entity, has to one day leave this body. So we should not, again, this is one of the very first early instructions. Dehi nosmin yatha dehi komaram jovanam jara tata dehantara prapir dhiras tatrana muyati. So the devotee should be tolerant and he should be sober-minded. Sober-minded. We can only develop this by hearing on a regular basis and endeavoring to actually cultivate this knowledge. So on an individual, personal basis, we should be sober-minded means, to use a modern expression, cool-minded. You know, we hear about this one is real hot-headed, you know. People who can't control themselves. We should, this is an important quality for devotee, to be sober-minded, because it's only when we develop this type of mentality, then we can think about others. Otherwise, we are overly preoccupied with our own self, with our own, you know, situation. But for a devotee, this becomes very simplified. The more we actually learn the science of surrender, we leave things in Krishna's hand. Good things will happen, bad things will happen. That's all part of the material world, you see. Our main focus should be to actually help others come in contact with this understanding and this knowledge so that they can learn how to put an end to their ever-increasing suffering in the material world. Because until and unless an individual comes in contact with this knowledge, one simply is increasing one's entanglement. And surely one will end up in one of those 27, 26, you know, hellish planets. Is it 26 or 27? We'll find out when we go there. No, you don't want to go there. Devotees don't go there. Hellish planets are not for devotees. Even though sometimes somebody becomes a devotee and then may commit some sinful activity, some other type of suffering. Hellish planets are for those who are not devotees. But for a devotee, the most hellish condition, if we cultivate this knowledge properly, the most hellish condition is being away from Krishna, is being away from the material, from the spiritual world, isn't it? That is a real, actual suffering and anxiety. This type of anxiety is to have. That as long as we are not again reinstated in our natural, eternal, loving relationship with Krishna, we should be in anxiety. Our problem is that we're not in anxiety. We're in the wrong kind of anxiety. We're in anxieties about our job, about returning to America or not, about about so many different things. We're in anxiety about our house, about our children. It's not that we become careless, but we see things in proper order and proper dimension. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is glorifying the sentiments being expressed by Parikshit Maharaj, who is demonstrating this very important quality of paradukha dukhi. One is concerned about the welfare of other living entities. And if we see throughout our Guru Parampara, that is the foremost meditation, the foremost thought of our acharyas, and all of their activities are meant to actually introduce and give this understanding to alleviate the suffering of the conditioned souls. So as followers of our acharyas, that is nicely explained, for a disciple to actually come to the platform of perfection, then he should be in tune. He should be understanding what is the desire of the spiritual master, what is the desire of our acharyas, and how I can assist in fulfilling their desire, because their desire is Krishna's desire. And Krishna, either directly himself or through various, through different incarnations or different representatives, that is one of the primary reasons he descends in the material world, to spread the knowledge of dharma. Dharma samstapanataya sambhavami yuge yuge, to reestablish the principles of dharma. I will read the text again. Yeah. So this was text number 6. Parikshit Maharaj speaking here. O greatly fortunate and opulent Shukadeva Goswami, now kindly tell me how human beings may be saved from having to enter hellish conditions in which they suffer terrible pains. Yeah. We have a few minutes if there's any comment or question. Yes.
Shukadeva Goswami is a mendicant. He has left.
Shukadeva Goswami is a mendicant.
Yeah, so he doesn't want any property and traveling around. So, but while Parikshit Maharaj addressing him, he says, "Oh, opulent Shukadeva Goswami." What he means by opulent there?
Ah, okay. Nice question. So the question is in relation to Shukadeva Goswami, who is not having any possessions. He's a wandering mendicant. Why is it that Parikshit Maharaj is referring to him as being opulent? That's the question. Yeah. Oh, opulent. That's how it's. He makes 2 points. Oh, greatly fortunate and opulent. Yeah. That is with the word Mahabhaga. Mahabhaga, Prabhupada translates as greatly opulent and fortunate. So how can a mendicant be opulent? How can a poor man be rich? Actually, the opulence that is being referred to here is spiritual opulence. Spiritual opulence is in the form of these wonderful devotional qualities that one actually develops. These are the natural qualities of the spirit soul. When one becomes freed from this material entanglement, freed from the modes of material nature, and undisturbed by the threefold miseries of life, then he becomes reinstated or resituated in his constitutional position as an eternal servant of the Lord. And Vaishnavas, we read, they have 26 qualities, isn't it? So the opulence being referred to here, and the fortune, one is greatly fortunate to again become reinstated as an eternal servant of the Lord in one's constitutional position. So therefore, this is connected with Shastra Chakshu. For a materialistic person, money is opulence, isn't it? For a devotee, money is just paper, isn't it? For a devotee, real wealth is to be freed from these gunas. Real wealth is to be developing these natural qualities that we all have as spirit souls. And just like real wealth in the Vedic culture is also very different from what people think wealth is in modern day. You know, people think that real wealth is having lots of money and possessing many objects or gadgets, whatever. But in the Vedic culture, real wealth, as we read from Shastra, is found in having land, in having cows, in having Krishna conscious friends. That is the real wealth for a devotee. Yeah? Any other thought? Question? Clarification?
Narakas are mentioned 28 now.
Huh?
28 Narakas.
28, eh? Okay. Somehow we were missing one or two there. 28. 28.
So
Yes.
regarding hellish planets,
Regarding hellish planets, you want to know more about the hellish planets?
some technical, there was a discussion between devotees. Somewhere I heard 84 lakhs hellish planets are there, which is nothing but 84 lakh species of life, human, different forms.
You heard from somewhere that there are 84 lakhs of hellish planets.
Yeah, even in Bhagavatam
Which
it was
is-
stated like many are there, but I am explaining which
Only a
is
few,
important, like
yeah.
that it is said in the Bhagavatam.
Means we all have, each species has its own hellish planet, is basically what you're saying.
Yes, it's like that I heard.
Yeah.
For a human form is one hellish. We are sitting in this body itself is a hellish. Like that 84 lakh species bodies are there.
Well, that's another nice way of understanding it because, in these 8,400,000 species that are there, any living entity, spirit soul, that becomes entangled or caught up in any of these species, it means that we are away from our original nature. So we are in a hellish condition. Yeah. But it doesn't mean necessarily, I mean, I've never read, that there are that number of hellish planets. Although what you mentioned is true, that what Shukadeva Goswami has described in the Bhagavatam, these 28 hellish planets, may be the principal hellish planets, or maybe more. Regardless, main thing is that our situation is a very precarious situation, very unfortunate situation, unhappy situation, to be anywhere in the material world. But of all of the different places in the material world, or all of the different planets, and all of the different species, the human form of life is glorified and described as being that rare and unique species of life whereby one can put an end to actually, the problems and miseries of life by the cultivation of this knowledge and by taking up essentially the practice of Krishna consciousness or devotional service. There are many shastras, and there might be more detailed information in some of them regarding other hellish planets as well, but we know from Bhagavatam there are 28. Even one hellish planet is bad enough. Yeah. So, thank you all for attending Bhagavatam class this morning. We will close here. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai Samasta Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki Gaura Pimanande.
Zolanese Bhakti Raghava Swami Maharaj ki